You probably heard of quiet quitting. Well, we talked about that before. Quiet quitting means someone decides, well, I'm not going to do a single bit more than the minimum requirements of my working contract say, and sooner or later I am going to leave this organization because they already decided, often due to leadership behavior, this organization is not for me. And that effect happened quite frequently in the recent past. However, we now have to talk about what is quiet hiring. Quiet hiring sounds quite positive, and quiet hiring is exactly that. Quiet hiring means you already have the talent in front of your noses. However, often we fail to develop them accordingly. How to develop the right talent and have an approach against the lack of workforce and lack of talent on the market. We all know that at the moment, workforce is scarce, and talent is even scarcer in that workforce. However, positions have to be filled with the right people. At the same time, when you look into the age demographics in your organization, most organizations say, well, there are quite a number of people who are going into pension or retirement in one way or the other reasonably soon. In many industries, in many organizations, people even say, with the usual approach of putting job ads out there and recruiting people, there is no chance that we can get anywhere close to where we need to be with recruiting the right people in time for having enough time to train them to the level they have to be to fill in the gaps we have higher in the hierarchy. Because transferring knowledge is one aspect. However, transferring experience is hardly possible, especially not in a very quick way. So you now have to wonder, when you at the same time look at less applicants, and often you say this less stack of applicants often are not the right people who apply, the solution of, well, let's hire external people often meets the limited budget. And you say, well, I would love to hire external people or just have external consultants doing the job. However, that's just too expensive for us. Our business model doesn't work that way. Or when you're in public service, you say the household situation, the money we have doesn't even allow that we have external people here. So how do you deal with that? We have to talk about three aspects today. First, what do we do now, and what are the problems that we have here? I'm not going to call it challenges. I call it problems because these are problems, not challenges. Aspect number two, what's the path of the future? And aspect number three, how to implement that in your organization. Aspect number one, and problem number one, is that today's application procedures are, and I put it in the most polite words, outdated. They take too long. Too many people are involved. There are too many rounds. And even from the very beginning, you already frustrate people dealing with you. What you need to do is you need to be extremely easy to work with. And that is what most organizations claim that they are. And I can tell you, when we looked into science and we did research on that by ourselves, which was a lot of effort, we went through countless portals. And I can tell you the amount of moments where we first had to answer questions which were good up to that point, where they say, do you have a LinkedIn? We say, yeah, here's the LinkedIn. Next question was, do you have your CV as a PDF? Where you wonder, excuse me, when you have my LinkedIn, why do you need my CV as a PDF? Well, okay, here's the PDF then. And step number three then was, oh, here, by the way, you have a form. Could you please fill in all the details of your CV in that form again? Manually. Well, of course, people say, no, I am not doing this. If that is how I need to work with you to get hired, I do not even want to know how you work internally and how inefficient and annoying everything is with your organization in real world practice once I'm hired. Thank you, no thank you, and you just lost another talent. And by the way, the number one excuse, because we of course then called these companies and asked, why do you do this? And the number one response was, oh, we have a recruiting software and all these different forms need to be filled, because if they're not filled, I can't proceed with the recruiting procedure, so people have to stick to our process. Great. So you tell people in a moment of scarce workforce and scarce talent that they have to stick to your rules. Brilliant. Whoever decided that in management or whoever decided on an executive level needs to be retrained or removed. Preferably retrained, because removed just creates another gap. You need to shorten your application procedures significantly. And please stop that every single person wants to have a say on the recruiting. We had PA positions for less than £30,000 or dollars or euros a year. So really entry-level position, which had 4, 5, 6, 7 rounds, sometimes in one case even 8 rounds of interviews. And these interviews were nothing else. Someone else wants to be taken important as well. They want to have a chit-chat with you. There is no structure in the interview. It's all talking, no questioning. The person from the organization talks 80% of the time and the applicant 20% if they're lucky. It's all display of ego. The person just wants to be considered important. And of course, during the annual appraisal interview, they want to say, I do recruiting here, and that is why I'm part of the talent workforce, which means you have to pay me more money. A disturbing behavior. And unfortunately, there aren't even proper horizons being set out in the first place, where they say at the beginning, we have to look at certain skills today, we do a certain number of tests, and we need to see a certain skill set today. That's the goal of today's talk. No, they say, we just have a chit-chat, and afterwards, based on completely arbitrary impressions, often sympathy or non-existent sympathy, you say yes or no to that person. And in the next moment, you wonder why you don't find talent. That is borderline psychopathy. So you have to decide, how do you want to do recruiting in the future? Do it quicker, do it shorter, just to give you the number you have to meet from the moment the application arrives until the contract is signed. 30 days or less. And when you now say it's impossible, and then we always have the two excuses. Either you say we're too large, we can't do that, or you say we're too small, we don't have enough people. Sven Semet, we just had two of the most important HR and talent development fairs in Germany just 2 weeks ago. And Sven Semet is a former executive from IBM. He implemented with IBM because IBM lost out on talent for being too slow. Sven Semet now works for a different company who's in the learning field. Before that, he was the executive being responsible and accountable to implement that IBM is able to, from first moment of contact to signature, is able to deal with you within 28 days or less. And when IBM is able to do so on a global workforce scale, including all compliance and regulatory compliance prerequisites, if they are able to do so, what's your excuse? And the excuse often is you're not very well organized. By the way, I can help with that, but that's a different story here. So when you have the right procedure, that is, of course, a good beginning. And then you have to look at how just is your recruiting. Often there's an internal call to action where people say, please apply internally. And of course, you put job ads out there. And often there's a certain focus where people in organizations say there's a certain injustice in one way or the other. Either people say, look, we have people who apply externally. However, we all know who's going to be the successor and we all know who gets the job. However, there's a regulatory compliance thing that we need external people to apply, but they will never get the job. They're basically wasting their time. So we always take the internal person, which we agreed upon before, but we just do it for fun to see what's on the market or whatever else reason you might have to do that. But you pre-agreed who's going to be the successor. That is, of course, embarrassing. And some companies do it vice versa. They never pick the internal candidate. Internally, people can apply as often as they want. They always pick the external candidate. And I worked for companies where they were crystal clear, fortunately. I worked in pharmaceuticals and IT where they were crystal clear. With the first employer I was with, they always said, we take 2/3 of all positions externally, 1/3 internally. There's a higher chance of having an external career than an internal one. And you knew that when you started. While in the other position I was in IT, they said our principle, which is, by the way, the financially cheaper approach, our principle is grow your own people. So it's much more likely to have an internal career than an external career here. Be crystal clear on what you are doing there. We have seen certain situations, and especially a couple of situations we saw in public service, were borderline corruption, where someone who was perfectly well qualified for the job wasn't even invited to round number 1 due to a lack of formal prerequisites. And when we asked what was this lack, they said, oh, well, we don't want to get into any detail. If you disagree with that, you can file a lawsuit. Great. That's, of course, how you want to get a job. You sue yourself into an organization. Amazing. The problem with internal people often is that sometimes senior managers and executives say, well, you're nearly there, but not quite yet. You don't trust the person because you know them from the very beginning. You know them from when they started, how they did their first training, their vocational training, or their first studies. And throughout the years, you had a certain impression of that person is the junior person here. They just learn everything. They are learning. but they are not senior. And this impression lasts so heavily with you that you do not trust them to get into any senior position. And of course, people will then say, you know what? I just go somewhere else where they say, they think I am there. So I just pick up their offer. Thank you very much and goodbye. And you lose internal great candidates. The consequence is often that you have to hire someone externally. Sometimes you have to do interim, which means you have to pay even more money. You lose internal talent. Often the problem then is double the problem because people say our recruiting processes are not just, it's borderline corruption. That's something which even employees in certain research processes told us, and they used exactly that word, borderline corruption. And when you then say, oh, it's so bad, we don't find any external applicants, we have to get someone on an interim position or get external consultants in to do that job, then you tripled the problem because then you do not only have no internal person, you have no external person, you have a much more expensive external person temporarily that 100% guaranteed will leave the job. If you're very lucky, you find someone who's in a certain life situation, is an external consultant, and you can convince them somehow magically to go into employment back again. And that is a rare situation, but it happens. It sometimes happens, so you might be the lucky one. But at least the problem is double of what it was before, sometimes even triple. So what is the way of the future? You have to do 3 aspects. Aspect number 1, train people. Aspect number 2, retrain them. Aspect number 3, promote to train and retrain them. And when now people say, wait, Niels, do you tell me that I should pay people to get on a certain position? So pay them before they have the skills? Remember when I told you this, oh, you're not quite there yet. Stop saying that phrase. You need to give people the trust and say you're growing into the position. And now, here is the change between what happened to my generation and today's generations. I'm happy that today's generation have the opportunity. I didn't have it. Back in the days when I started, and I was someone who went into pharmaceuticals, not by standard qualification. I went into IT, not by standard qualification. I have proven by certain month of work, a lot of work, I can tell you. I have proven that I could do the job because I was referred into the job. But during the first 6 months, I got way less money than usual. They said, first you have to prove that you're the right pick. After probation time, usually 6 months in the areas where I worked, they said after probation time, you get the proper payment. These times are over. These times are over. When you say, first you have to prove yourself, then you get the money, these times are over due to a scarce situation of workforce and talent. Full pay for what they do, even if they are in the phase of qualification. And when now people say, well, that's basically overpaying them in the beginning, I can only tell you, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Have to be straightforward. When someone has no leadership skills, you give them the full money to go through a leadership qualification program. There's a steep learning curve, of course, involved, which needs to be tightly managed and, of course, guided throughout the whole phase. However, you have to pay them in the first place, because if you don't, there are enough people on the market who hire your talent and say, you get the money here if you don't get it from your employer right now. And by the way, keeping internal people and paying them more is still cheaper than hiring external people. But that's something you probably already know. What you need to get away from, and I can tell you from experience, once I delivered a speech at a conference, and after my speech, suddenly someone from C-level went on stage and said, oh, we have 2 new amazing people on board. I'm going to present to you 2 people. And then they told the whole CV, 2 female people, both bachelor's, master's, PhD qualified, international stations in work life, different continents, different industries, a vast amount of experience. They were both in their beginning 30s. One was 32, the other one was 33. And it sounded like an introduction to me to a senior executive position. And suddenly there was an unexpected twist, to say the least, because then this C-level person said, and these new people are now our new trainees. This is now 15 years ago, and probably back then was the last time where you could do that. When you think that people who are in their beginning 30s, bachelor, master, international experience, PhD level qualified, and then you tell them, well, because you don't have the practical experience, here are another at least 2 years of close to minimum wage payment. Congratulations. You shouldn't be surprised that you don't find talent. When you say, oh, here's another round of traineeship or voluntary services or anything where you say, especially in the PR and advertising sector, you often have positions where they say, oh, yeah, you can work here, but it's work experience, so it's not paid. So please show up with master's level qualification, and after you basically worked your skin off, you can then hope that after a year of unpaid work, we might give you a mildly paid position. That's not okay. That's ethically and morally wrong. And also you shouldn't be surprised that your gap of talent gets larger by the day. What you need is upskilling. Upskilling is when of course, you pay people. That's something you might disagree. I can tell you, even for me, it feels a bit strange when you are the generation who had to work through all this effort and suddenly people get the whole pay up front without having the skills. It doesn't feel great. However, I'm happy that people get the pay. Young people have enough issues with situations we have in society today. I'm not going to argue with that. It still, I have to openly admit, feels strange. And that, by the way, shows a mature manager and executive. You can manage your feelings and look at the facts. And the facts are we have scarce workforce, scarce level of talent, and we go forward with looking into the future of getting people on the right job. And we're not going to argue about a handful of pennies compared to the overall organizational budget. Upskilling means you train the people fully paid on the position. However, when you train them, please refrain from telling people, oh yeah, we have amazing qualifications for you. Go to the internet. There's a very long e-learning session. We purchased it for 49 euros or pounds or dollars. And just go through it. It's 120 hours of videos. And by the way, do that besides your main job and see you at the end of the video session. Of course, people will leave you. And of course, the level of transferred knowledge is very, very low. You need professional trainers, coaches, consultants in your organization. They can be internally when they are well qualified. But training, coaching, however you want to call it, must have a professional qualification. It has to be founded in science, so scientifically sound. However, it has to be with real-world experience. No one can teach future leaders when you haven't been a leader in the first place. And that's another aspect. You need to be at least a bit entertaining. And of course, people often say, well, it's knowledge. You don't need to be entertaining. Look, when you sit in a 2-day class of leadership and you have to listen to someone, even in full interaction with all the group work, group exercise and whatnot you could implement during the day. I now do this for more than 20 years. If you have a 0 level of entertainment skills, or at least make it attractive to listen to, that's quite difficult to learn rhetoric skill. People will not listen to you for 8 hours a day. Scientifically sound, you need to have the real world experience, so it is real world applicable what you try to transfer to them and what you try to explain to them. But it also needs to be somehow entertaining, because no matter what position you get people into, they need to be able to attract people who are willing to listen to them. And that always means you need to be a person that is attractive to listen to. Part of that is being a bit entertaining. I know, shocking, especially for German listeners. I am German. I am Northern German, born and bred very Northern German. I can tell you it's a steep learning curve, but it can be learned. When a born and bred Northern German like me can learn it, you can learn it as well. So when you have internal trainers instead of picking external ones, they have to meet this criteria as well. Proactivity instead of reactivity is the key to having a successful level of pipeline talent in the pipeline. When you say, well, no one applied to our new position, you never said anything. Back in the days, that was the attitude. They said, if you want to have a career, someone will show up. They will tell you want to have a career. Today, it's vice versa. You have to show that you're interested in the person, that you want them to have a career. If you don't show up, they will think you're not interested. And then they will react on someone who is either on Kununu, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Xing, depending on which area you are. There are different platforms that are the most relevant, but they will be approached in one way or the other as soon as they pop up as a talent on the market. Be proactive instead of reactive. How do you now implement this in the real world of your organization? Step number 1, allocate budget. If you do not allocate the right level of budget, this project will die. It needs proper pay. If you go minimum pay, you get minimum results. End of story. Allocate proper budget. Step number 2, this whole development program needs to be properly designed. It needs to be tested with pilots and feedback. And then, of course, the feedback needs to be implemented. This whole procedure of a talent program being there needs to be proactively communicated so people can engage with you at a very early stage and also can be motivated to develop themselves into being considered for this talent development program. And step number 3, CSI, continual service improvement. Today also included in different standards like ISO or British standard or whatever industry you're in. A continual service improvement plan. No matter how great your program is in the first place, we have such a quick development of content and relevant topics. You always need to update it every single year so it stays relevant in the market. When I see, and I just saw it this year in January, where young people were taught by a time management trainer how to organize themselves with little cards. You can Google it, the DAISY system. You have little red cards and you have little white cards, little yellow cards. It was all on paper. It was 100% paper-based time management. And I know this principle because I learned it as well. However, this kind of time management is completely outdated for the digital world. By the way, the answer was, we worked with that time management trainer for a long time. Yeah, by the way, the course was cut off halfway through because people said, this is just not working. Continual service improvement means you continually keep your program updated. If you do that and do everything we talked about before, yes, it's a lot of work, but then you will find enough talent because they are in front of your nose. If you apply client hiring well, you save money, immediate positive aspect and effect on the bottom line. And also you will have a lot less stress when it comes to thinking about how do we fill the future talent gap. And with that, I wish you all the best. And of course, when you now say, well, I have 27 questions about that. I'm happy to talk with you. Just drop me an email. nb@nb-networks.com is my email address. You also find my email address in the show notes of this podcast, so feel free to contact me anytime. There's also my LinkedIn in the show notes of this podcast, so feel free to text me there as well. The second aspect, which I always recommend, is we have live sessions. We just had one last week, which went very well. Feel free to contact me there. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, you can put your email address in there, and you only receive one email every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content ad-free guarantee. You see everything I publish there, and of course you see the date and the time of the next live session, including the link to get to this live session, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. It's available in the English and German language, so looking forward to seeing you there. Even you can take your international colleagues with you. It's always very interactive, so looking forward to seeing you there. The third aspect is the most important one. Apply what you learned in this podcast, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspect happening and the positive change happening that you obviously want to see in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. Feel free to contact me 24/7. I'm always available for help. And at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.